Saturday mornings once promised pure magic, bright colors, sugary cereal, and worlds where anything felt possible. But behind the glitter of animation history lies a darker shelf of forgotten reels. Some cartoons never soared. They stumbled, crashed, and vanished almost overnight. What happens when studios gamble big and lose even bigger? Today, we revisit 19 Saturday morning cartoons that completely flopped. Rubik, The Amazing Cube, 1983. In the early 1980s, the Rubik's Cube was everywhere: bedrooms, classrooms, toy shelves. So, in a burst of corporate confidence, Hanna-Barbera tried to turn the puzzle into a Saturday morning hero. Rubik, The Amazing Cube, featured a magical cube with glowing eyes and a squeaky voice who helped a group of Latino kids solve everyday problems. On paper, it looked like a stroke of marketing genius: fuse a toy craze with animated adventures. In reality, audiences scratched their heads. The cube's powers were vague. Sometimes he could fly, sometimes teleport, sometimes just crack corny jokes. Kids tuned in hoping for Rubik-related excitement, but instead got bland, forgettable morality tales. Even the theme song, chirped by the pop group Menudo, couldn't save it. The show lasted just one season, airing briefly on ABC in 1983. Its legacy today? A symbol of the shameless toy-to-cartoon pipeline of the 1980s, where any hot fad was fair game. But unlike Transformers or G.I. Joe, Rubik had no heart, no story, and no staying power. In the end, the cube was unsolvable, not as a puzzle, but as a piece of television history. Camp Candy, 1989. John Candy was one of the most beloved comedians of the 1980s, so NBC thought they struck gold by giving him his own animated Saturday morning show. Camp Candy placed Candy at the center of a cartoon summer camp, where he voiced himself as a bumbling but lovable camp director, guiding kids through goofy misadventures. While Candy's charm was undeniable, the show faced a fundamental problem: translating his adult-oriented, comedic timing into a children's format. The jokes were soft, the stories predictable, and the pacing slow compared to the hyperactive fare kids craved by the late 1980s. Ratings reflected the mismatch. Behind the scenes, Candy was reportedly enthusiastic, even lending story ideas, but network executives pushed for a safe formula. Instead of edgy or unique, it became forgettable fluff. By its third season, it was quietly dropped, surviving only in reruns on cable. Ironically, Candy's memory endured on the big screen and in cult comedies, but his animated alter ego faded into obscurity. What was meant to immortalize his star power instead underscored how even beloved icons can misfire when the medium doesn't fit. Mr. T, 1983. At the height of his fame, Mr. T wasn't just a wrestler, a bodyguard, and a member of the A-Team. He was also a cartoon gymnastics coach. Yes, Mr. T, produced by Ruby Spears, saw the Mohawk tough guy, leading a multiracial team of gymnasts around the world, solving mysteries and teaching life lessons. Kids adored Mr. T, but the cartoon exaggerated his persona to cartoonish extremes. Each episode opened with a live-action segment featuring T himself, promising wisdom, only to pivot into generic Scooby-Doo-style capers. Critics panned the writing, calling it shallow and repetitive. Though it ran for 3 seasons, Mr. T quickly became a punchline. Its awkward blend of sports, mystery, and moralizing felt forced, like executives trying to cash in on Mr. T's fame without understanding why kids liked him in the first place. Today, it's remembered less as a triumph and more as an odd cultural artifact, a relic of a time when every celebrity was shoehorned into a cartoon, whether or not it worked. And in this case, pitying the fool was easy. The Gary Coleman Show, 1982. In 1982, NBC gambled on another star-driven project, The Gary Coleman Show. Riding high from different strokes, Coleman lent his voice to Andy LeBeau an angel sent back to Earth to help kids solve problems with supernatural powers. It was a bizarre concept, part moral tale, part supernatural sitcom, yet neither side fully delivered. Ratings were weak, and children's critics argued the show leaned too heavily on Coleman's fame rather than original storytelling. Behind the scenes, Coleman's grueling workload as a child actor left little room for creative involvement. The cartoon barely lasted one season, fading quickly from memory. For Coleman, it was another project in a career where adults cashed in on his popularity while he bore the toll. Watching it today, The Gary Coleman Show feels almost haunting, a reminder of how networks squeezed every drop from young stars without ever stopping to ask whether audiences really needed an animated version of them. Hammerman, 1991. In the early 90s, MC Hammer was everywhere. Platinum albums, sold-out tours, and parachute pants that became a cultural punchline. So ABC decided to bottle that fame into a Saturday morning cartoon, Hammerman. The premise? Hammer receives magic dancing shoes that give him superpowers to fight crime. It sounds like parody, but it was real. Episodes showed Hammer rapping moral lessons while transforming into a superhero with the help of his talking shoes. The show even opened with a live-action Hammer introducing the cartoon, much like Mr. T. The execution, however, was disastrous. Animation was cheap, plots nonsensical, and moral lessons painfully forced. Critics tore it apart as one of the most blatant examples of a network trying to cash in on celebrity status. Even kids, Hammer's core fans, weren't impressed. The show aired only for a few months in 1991 before being canceled. Today, Hammerman lives on in YouTube clips and worst cartoon ever lists, a surreal reminder of how quickly fame can fade. In trying to immortalize Hammer's stardom, the show instead documented its decline. The Brady Kids, 1972. By the early 1970s, the Brady Bunch was a cultural phenomenon, so ABC spun off an animated version featuring the Brady children as cartoon adventurers. The Brady Kids placed them in zany situations involving talking animals, magical creatures, and thinly disguised lessons. On the surface, it seemed foolproof. Take America's favorite TV family and give them animated freedom. But the execution left viewers cold. The kids' voices were supplied by the actual Brady actors, but without the live-action chemistry, their banter felt flat. Worse, the plots veered into absurd fantasy instead of relatable family hijinks. Audiences who loved the wholesome sitcom rejected the bizarre cartoon version. Ratings dipped quickly, and after 2 short seasons, the series was canceled. Critics at the time dismissed it as a cheap cash-in, and even Brady fans tend to ignore its existence today. Instead of expanding the Brady legacy, it underscored how fragile TV popularity could be. When transplanted to a different medium, even America's favorite family couldn't hold together. Laverne and Shirley in the Army, 1981. Spin-offs of popular sitcoms were a Saturday morning staple, but few were as odd as Laverne and Shirley in the Army. Based on the beloved sitcom about 2 working-class women in Milwaukee, the cartoon reimagined the pair as Army recruits going through boot camp. Voiced initially by Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams, the show attempted slapstick antics in a military setting. To make it more kid-friendly, Hanna-Barbera added an anthropomorphic pig named Sergeant Squealy, who constantly tattled on the duo. The show struggled from the start. Fans of the sitcom found it insulting, while kids didn't connect to the premise. Behind the scenes, tension brewed when Cindy Williams left after disagreements, forcing the studio to replace her voice. Ratings plummeted, and after just 1 season, it quietly disappeared. Today, Laverne and Shirley in the Army is remembered only as an embarrassing footnote, proof that even beloved sitcoms could be mangled into unrecognizable Saturday morning disasters. Chuck Norris, Karate Commandos, 1986. Chuck Norris was an action icon of the 1980s, But when Ruby Spears turned him into a Saturday morning cartoon hero, the results were anything but legendary. Chuck Norris Karate Commandos featured Norris leading a multicultural team of fighters battling a terrorist group called Vulture. Like Mr. T and Hammerman, the show opened with live-action segments of Norris himself, setting up the lesson of the week. But the animation was low budget, and the stories recycled tired tropes. Villains were laughably one-dimensional, and the constant moralizing felt more preachy than inspiring. Despite Chuck Norris's real-world martial arts reputation, the cartoon couldn't capture his intensity. It aired only 5 episodes in syndication before fading into obscurity. Fans still joke about its absurdity. A karate master turned Saturday morning PSA machine. What was meant to immortalize Norris as a role model instead became a curious misstep in his otherwise tough-as-nails legacy. ProStars 1991. In the early 90s, 3 names dominated sports: Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, and Bo Jackson. NBC thought, why not put them together in a Saturday morning cartoon? Thus, ProStars was born. The show reimagined the 3 athletes as crime-fighting superheroes, saving the world with their respective talents: Jordan's agility, Gretzky's hockey skills, and Bo's all-around athleticism. On paper, it seemed unbeatable. Who wouldn't want to watch 3 living legends in animated form? But the reality was far less thrilling. For starters, the athletes themselves had minimal involvement. Their characters were voiced by impersonators, and their live-action segments were awkwardly stiff, clearly filmed between real-world commitments. The animation was cheap, the stories shallow, and the attempts to weave sports into crime-fighting scenarios often bordered on ridiculous. Bo Jackson once used baseball bats to battle robots, while Gretzky's defining trait was an obsession with food. Critics slammed the show as uninspired marketing, while kids tuned out in droves. Despite its ambitious crossover appeal, ProStars only lasted 13 episodes. Instead of celebrating these athletes' dominance, it reduced them to caricatures. Today, it's remembered less as a tribute and more as a cautionary tale. Greatness on the court, field, or rink doesn't always translate to greatness on screen. Turbo Teen, 1984. Of all the strange Saturday morning experiments, Turbo Teen might be the strangest. Produced by Ruby Spears, the show told the story of Brett Matthews, a teenager who merges with his car during a freak laboratory accident. Whenever exposed to heat, Brett transforms into a red sports car, only returning to human form when cooled down. It was a premise straight out of comic book absurdity, but instead of thrilling, it left audiences confused. The transformation scenes were unintentionally horrifying, with Brett's body stretching and morphing into chrome and wheels, more nightmare fuel than Saturday fun. Behind the scenes, Ruby Spears hoped to capitalize on kids' love of cars and superheroes, but the execution was bizarre. The villains were forgettable, the dialogue clunky, and the stories repetitive. Critics at the time mocked it as one of the most absurd concepts ever pitched for kids' TV. Though it ran for just 13 episodes, Turbo Teen developed an odd cult following in later years for its sheer weirdness. Clips of the grotesque transformations circulate online as examples of animation gone wrong. What was meant to excite children about high-octane adventures instead reminded them that some ideas are better left in the sketchbook. The New Archies, 1987. Archie and his gang have been cartoon mainstays for decades, but the New Archies tried to modernize them in a way that backfired. Airing in 1987, this version reimagined Archie, Betty, Veronica, Jughead, and Reggie as junior high schoolers in the 80s, complete with big hair, neon fashion, and awkward slang. The idea was to make the Riverdale gang cool for a new generation. Unfortunately, fans of the classic comics hated the drastic redesigns, while kids unfamiliar with Archie weren't won over by the forced 80s trends. Jughead suddenly had braces and no crown, Veronica was a mall-obsessed valley girl, and Archie seemed more bland than ever. Production troubles plagued the series as well. The animation felt stiff, the writing uninspired, and the attempts at pop culture relevance came off as cringeworthy even in its own era. Critics called it a clumsy rebrand, and ratings quickly dropped. After just one season, the new Archies was canceled. Its failure taught networks a valuable lesson. Tampering too much with beloved characters risks alienating both old and new fans. Instead of keeping Archie timeless, it locked him in an awkward, neon-soaked time capsule. Gilligan's Planet, 1982. Spinning off Gilligan's Island into a cartoon might have worked once, but pushing it into space was a step too far. Gilligan's Planet launched in 1982, with the original cast voicing animated versions of their characters stranded on another world after building a spaceship to escape the island. The concept was already absurd, but the execution made it worse. The stories revolved around Gilligan's clumsy antics with alien creatures, recycling the same jokes that had grown stale by the end of the original live-action series. The outer space setting felt forced, as though writers were desperate to cash in on the sci-fi craze sparked by Star Wars. Though some die-hard fans appreciated hearing the original actors, most audiences found it embarrassing. The humor was dated, the animation cheap, and critics mocked it as Gilligan's Island with green paint. It only lasted one season before being quietly dropped. Today, Gilligan's Planet stands as a perfect example of how far networks would stretch a franchise past its breaking point. What began as a clever sitcom premise in the 60s ended as a cartoon stranded in obscurity. The Jackson 5-5, 1971. At the height of Motown's glory, the Jackson 5 were teen idols, dominating charts and magazines. So in 1971, Rankin Bass produced the Jackson 5 for ABC, aiming to capture their musical energy in cartoon form. The show featured animated versions of Michael, Jermaine, Tito, Jackie, and Marlon, embarking on wacky adventures between musical numbers. On the surface, it had star power. The real group's hit songs played throughout, and their cultural fame was unmatched. But there was one glaring problem. The Jacksons themselves didn't voice their characters. Instead, studio voice actors mimicked them, while the group's music was dubbed in DAW separately. Fans quickly noticed the disconnect, and critics found it unsettling. Episodes leaned on weak plots, usually contrived excuses to insert songs, while animation quality varied wildly. Behind the scenes, the Jacksons were reportedly too busy touring to commit to the cartoon, leaving the show feeling like a hollow imitation of their real stardom. Though it lasted 2 seasons, the cartoon faded quickly once its novelty wore off. Unlike the Beatles animated series before it, the Jackson 5-5 couldn't capture the band's true charisma. Today, it's remembered as both a marketing gimmick and a missed opportunity. What should have immortalized the group's youthful energy ended up exposing the limits of turning pop idols into cartoons. Yogi, 1991. By the early 90s, Hanna-Barbera was desperate to keep its classic characters relevant. Enter Yogi, a bold attempt to reimagine Yogi Bear, Boo Boo, and other Hanna-Barbera staples as teenage mall dwellers solving mysteries. Complete with neon fashion, skateboards, and hip slang, it was a radical departure from their original woodland antics. The gamble didn't pay off. Longtime fans rejected the radical redesigns, while new viewers found the show pandering and awkward. The voice work tried hard to inject attitude, but the storylines, mysteries inside Jellystone Mall, felt contrived and unfunny. Critics dismissed it as a desperate attempt to mimic the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other youth-oriented franchises. Behind the scenes, executives hoped to launch a wave of hipper updates of old properties. But when Yogi bombed after just 1 season, those plans evaporated. Merchandising tie-ins never took off, and the series became shorthand for Hanna-Barbera's declining influence in the Saturday morning space. Today, it's remembered mostly for how badly it misread its audience. Kids didn't want their favorite bears skateboarding in malls. They wanted them picnicking in Jellystone. Yogi proved that modernization without respect for legacy can alienate everyone. Partridge Family 2200 AD 1974. If spinning off live-action hits into cartoons was risky, sending them into the future was downright bizarre. That's exactly what CBS did with Partridge Family 2200 AD, a sci-fi reimagining of the popular musical sitcom. Instead of touring in a bus, the animated partridges zoomed around in a spaceship, performing concerts across the galaxy. The show was transparently modeled after the Jetsons, with futuristic gadgets, alien neighbors, and interstellar slapstick. But while the Jetsons felt charming, Partridge Family 2200 AD came across as forced and derivative. Even worse, only Shirley Jones and David Cassidy agreed to voice their characters. The rest were replaced, breaking the illusion for fans. Viewers found it bizarre to transplant the family into a sci-fi setting when their original charm came from relatable musical adventures. Ratings fell quickly, and the show was canceled after one season. Critics mocked it as an example of jumping the shark before the term even existed. Decades later, it's cited as one of the most head-scratching network experiments of the 1970s. Instead of preserving the Partridge Family's legacy, it locked them in a time capsule of Saturday morning misfires. The Addams Family, 1973. The Addams Family had already become iconic thanks to Charles Addams's macabre comics and the live-action TV series. In 1973, Hanna-Barbera attempted to translate that success into a Saturday morning cartoon. Featuring the family traveling the country in a haunted camper, the show tried to blend ghoulish humor with kid-friendly adventures. Despite the strong brand recognition, it fell flat. The animation softened the Addams' gothic edge, stripping away much of their eerie charm. Storylines leaned toward Scooby-Doo-style mysteries rather than the witty satire fans loved. The characters lost their bite, and without the original actors, the voices never fully clicked. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera wanted to tap into the popularity of spooky comedies, but in doing so, they watered down everything that made the Addams unique. Ratings sagged, and after one season, the show was shelved. Ironically, the Addams Family thrived in later adaptations, from the 90s movies to modern animated reboots. But the 1973 cartoon remains a forgotten misstep, proving that not every family thrives under Saturday morning's sunny spotlight. The Dukes, 1983. With the Dukes of Hazzard riding high in prime time, Hanna-Barbera rolled out the Dukes, an animated spin-off featuring the Duke Boys, Daisy, and Uncle Jesse. Instead of tearing through dirt roads in Hazzard County, the cartoon placed them in an international auto race against Boss Hogg and Roscoe. The shift from Southern mischief to globe-trotting competition baffled fans. Kids expected car chases and country charm, but got weak comedic races through exotic locales like Paris and Tokyo. Even worse, when John Schneider and Tom Wopat left the live-action series due to contract disputes, their animated characters were replaced by Coy and Vance Duke, two cousins nobody wanted. The writing was paper-thin, the animation uninspired, and the novelty wore off quickly. Critics called it a lazy cash-in, while even loyal Dukes fans barely tuned in. After 2 short seasons, it sputtered to a quiet finish. The cartoon is rarely remembered today, except as a case study in how to squander brand power. By trading its original charm for gimmicky races, the Dukes proved you can't just slap a familiar name on a weak concept and expect audiences to follow. The Harlem Globetrotters, 1970. The Harlem Globetrotters were basketball showmen like no other, dazzling audiences with trick shots and comedic flair. In 1970, Hanna-Barbera decided to bottle that magic into a Saturday morning cartoon. The animated Globetrotters battled villains, solved mysteries, and, of course, played basketball. While initially popular enough to last 2 seasons, the novelty wore off fast. Without the live energy of real games, the cartoon's repetitive antics fell flat. Episodes followed the same formula. The Globetrotters arrive somewhere new, get into trouble with outlandish villains, and save the day with basketball skills. Behind the scenes, it was part of Hanna-Barbera's group template, mirroring the structure of Scooby-Doo and Josie and the Pussycats. But fans eventually realized the charm of the Globetrotters was in their real athleticism, not animated caricatures. Though fondly remembered by some for its catchy theme, the cartoon's legacy is mostly as an odd marketing relic. What dazzled on the court became diluted on the small screen, proving that some magic can't be animated. The Mork and Mindy, Josh Laverne, and Shirley, Schadenfreude, 1982. At the very top of the flop list stands this baffling mashup. In 1982, ABC jammed together animated versions of Mork and Mindy, Laverne and Shirley in the Army, and the Fonz and the Happy Days gang into one Saturday morning block. What resulted was pure chaos. Robin Williams' breakout role as Mork was stripped of its wit, while Laverne and Shirley stumbled through military slapstick, and Fonzie time-traveled with a talking dog. None of the shows were strong alone, and combining them only highlighted their weaknesses. Critics savaged the block, calling it one of the most desperate Saturday morning programming moves ever attempted. Kids tuned out quickly, unable to make sense of the tonal whiplash. Within a year, the experiment collapsed, ending one of the strangest chapters in TV animation. This bizarre Frankenstein of shows stands today as the ultimate example of how networks mishandled beloved live-action sitcoms. Instead of preserving their legacies, they buried them in animated mediocrity. Saturday mornings promised magic, but as these shows prove, not every idea could fly. From celebrities to sitcom spin-offs, the race to cash in often ended in disaster. Which of these flops do you remember, or did your cereal bowl outlast them all? Like, subscribe, and share your forgotten favorites below.